afternoon, good evening. My name is Vikram Singh Mehta. I'm the chairman of the Center for Social and Economic Progress, and I'm delighted to welcome you all to this seminar on critical minerals and the work that CSEP has been doing on this subject. CSEP has been working on the full range of fossil fuels and non-fuel minerals under its vertical, the energy, natural resources, and sustainability domain. We have published a book on coal. We have also published a book on natural gas, and we're hoping that we will publish another book on the mineral sector. The issue of climate change is arguably, I wouldn't say arguably, it is probably the most important issue facing the global community today. Our work today is to really assess the relevance of critical minerals towards the mitigation of climate change. The research that we are doing today is focused on 23 critical minerals. It focuses on their importance to the Indian economy. It talks about the targets that the government has set for electricity generation, storage, and electrical vehicles in the context of these critical minerals. And it also focuses on the ambitious targets that the government has set out for itself in managing the transition from a fossil fuel-based economy to a cleaner energy system. We are working on this subject under the leadership of Professor Rajesh Chadda. And today, Rajesh is going to moderate the discussion. And I'm going to request him to take over from here. Before I do that, I do want to thank the three panelists for having joined us. And on behalf of myself and my colleague, Dr. Rakesh Mohan, who is unfortunately under the weather, and that is the reason why he has not been able to welcome you all in person, virtually. I'd like to welcome Ambassador Ranjan Mathai, Professor Mohan Yeli Shetty, and Dr. R.K. Sinha, and thank them for having agreed to be panelists on this webinar. So thank you all, and once again, thank you everyone for joining us today. Rajesh, may I hand it over to you, please?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mehta, and thanks for introducing the subject of the day today. I also welcome you and our distinguished panelists, Shri Ranjan Mathai, Shri R.K. Sinha, and Dr. Mohan Yeli Shetty, who I would introduce when I invite them for comments. The topic is climate change mitigation, critical minerals for green technologies. And I think Dr. Rakesh Mohan had suggested that why don't we move forward and forecast the future needs. What the order of the day that we have in mind is that we would be making a brief 10-minute presentation on work in progress, because the working paper is not yet over, to introduce what we have in mind. And then I will invite, after Ganesh has made the presentation, I would invite Shri Sinha, Shri Mathai, and Dr. Yeli Shetty in this order. The important issue that you have raised, Mr. Mehta, already, that we began this journey from Kyoto Protocol way back in 1997 and Paris Conference of Parties in 2015, and soon we are going to COP26 in Glasgow sometime later this year. And India has been doing its bit on announcing the policies, trying to implement, and with some success that we already see. The importance of critical minerals is for the reason that these new technologies would require much more quantities of certain minerals which have both economic and supply risks. Therefore, it is timely now to do some projection of what is future going to look like in up to 2030 and up to 2040, for which we are doing a major research project, and we only have some intermittent or intermediate results that or discussion points that I would request Ganesh to be presenting. And after Ganesh, you just be 10 to 12 minutes, and then each panelist will have about 10 to 12 minutes so that we have ample time for discussion. Once again, welcome you all, and welcome to those who have logged in and are listening to this presentation. Thank you very much. And Ganesh, over to you for next 12 minutes, 10 minutes, 12 minutes.
Thank you, Professor Chadha. My name is Ganesh Sivamani. I'm a research analyst at CSEP, and I'm very excited to present some of our preliminary findings of our working paper on critical minerals for green technologies. So to start with, I think it's worth mentioning a definition of what critical minerals are. And it goes down to minerals that are deemed to be highly essential for the manufacturing sector in a country, and also minerals which are thought to have supply risks associated in their supply chain. So these are the two characteristics that are looked at when determining which minerals are critical, and I'll come back to that later on. So another characteristic of the critical mineral is the highly complex global supply chains. Complex in the sense that a lot of extraction takes place in concentrated countries such as China, producing 58% of rare earths, the DR Congo, 70% of cobalt, and Australia, 55% of world's lithium. However, it's not just that the processing, the extraction takes place in these countries, but processing is also even more concentrated, with China taking the lion's share of most. So when looking at critical minerals, what we wanted to focus on is the two axes that I had mentioned earlier. These two axes are economic importance of the mineral to the economy and the supply risk associated with each mineral. What we want to do with our assessment of critical minerals is look at the Indian economy in particular and focus on a set of 23 minerals that we have pinpointed, which we believe to be important for green technologies over the next 20 years. So the objective of our study, as I mentioned in the top here, is to quantify which minerals are the most important for the Indian economy and also quantify the risks in their supply. So in terms of economic importance, we looked at two indicators. One, what is the impact of a non-availability of a mineral on the manufacturing GVA? And two, what are the substitutability options? So in case a mineral does have a substitute which happens to be equally priced and also performs equally well, then we say that it has a good substitute. On the other hand, some minerals such as niobium, which I'll come to later on, has no equivalent substitute, hence it's highly unsubstitutable. The second axis we look at is supply risk, and we measure supply risk across four indicators. The first is the mineral concentration by country, which I discussed briefly in the last slide. The mineral concentration refers to which countries are the ones that extract and process the minerals, and a mineral with high concentration in one country is deemed to have a higher supply risk. We also take a look at the World Governance Index, the indicators which measure how well governed the country is. So if a mineral is coming from a country where there's high levels of political instability, again, the supply risk is increased. Then the final two indicators are to do with how India imports the minerals. So in some cases, we have our own domestic supply and have very little import reliance. And in other cases, we don't have the geological potential and need to import. And finally, recycling rates, which will become a very important field in the future, especially when it comes to critical minerals which don't have high supply. India will need to improve its recycling, as does the globe, if we wish to also reduce mining activities, which contributes to other emissions. So going to the 23 minerals we've investigated, what we wanted to do was look at two varieties of minerals. The first are the cross-cutting minerals, which are minerals that are used across a variety of sectors. And then we looked at the concentrated minerals, which are minerals which are specifically used in one or two end-use applications. So of these 23, about 3 of them are used specifically for solar power, including silicon, silver, and indium. We then have a few minerals used for wind power, including neodymium, which is a major component for permanent magnets, and other rare earth elements as well. EVs and other storage devices like batteries are also included in this study. So cobalt, lithium, graphite, and vanadium. And the remaining are the cross-cutting minerals such as iron to make steel, bauxite for aluminium, which is important for all these technologies, and of course copper, a key component for all electrical appliances. We also investigated limestone, which is important for India's infrastructure ambitions, as limestone is used for manufacturing of cement. The results of our study were very interesting, and what we did was measure, as mentioned before, each mineral across the two axes: economic importance and supply risk. So column 1 looks at the minerals which have a high level of economic importance, column 2 high level of supply risk, and column 3 high levels of both economic importance and supply risk. So lithium takes high economic importance along with strontium and nickel. Lithium, of course, is a key component, especially in the future when we want to develop our EV manufacturing capabilities. In supply risk, rare earths also show up. As mentioned in the first slide, China is the large producer of rare earths with a dominance in the market, and we rely heavily on their manufacturing to meet our needs. And it's quite interesting, back in 2010, there was a situation where China stopped their export of certain rare earths to Japan, which increased the prices globally of not just the rare earths, but also of the downstream manufactured products, as rare earths go into many consumer goods. We also have minerals like indium, which is useful for solar panels, and neodymium used for wind turbines. Finally, we computed that niobium, cobalt, and chromium are both highly economically important, as well as having high supply risks. So these are the 3 minerals which we would consider to be the most critical in our study. I now move on to the second component of our study, which is the climate change mitigation targets. What we want to do here is not just analyze the criticality of minerals today, but we also want to take into account the various commitments India has made across the international forums as well as domestically on the climate change mitigation front. So a brief history on the various conferences held under the UNFCCC, starting with 1997, the Kyoto Protocol, where the first commitments were made on emission reduction. We then move on to 2009 in Copenhagen. The Copenhagen Accord was signed, where developing countries would receive funding to the tune of $100 billion from developed countries to help invest in climate change mitigation technologies. And this is something that India would like to tap into as well, as mentioned in their nationally determined contributions. More recently, we come to Paris, COP21. Of course, the climate agreement in Paris is well known, where we want to limit global warming to less than 2 degrees from the pre-industrial levels, and ideally under 1.5 degrees as well. Finally, 2021, so in November this year, we'll have the Glasgow conference, and many are touting this to be the last chance for making a serious effort into battling climate change. Now, on the domestic front, we've had 2 separate policies come out. Well, 2 of many. These are the 2 that we'd like to highlight, starting with the National Action Plan for Climate Change. This is actually a series of 8 missions with aims to continue India's development, which is very important, while also trying to reduce the emissions simultaneously. And secondly, we have India's nationally determined contributions. And over here, there are quite a few contributions that India has mentioned in the Paris Agreement. I'll highlight 1 or 2 of them. The most important one would be the reduction of India's emission intensity of GDP by 33 to 35% by 2030 compared to 2005 levels. We also wish to increase our cumulative renewable capacity to 40% by 2030. And finally, we wish to increase the amount of carbon sinks, CO2 sinks, by planting more trees to 3 billion tons. So these are the various commitments that India has made and been party to, which we use in forming our own projections as to what minerals are critical over the next 10, 20, even 30 years. So to start with, I want to look at very briefly the renewable energy capacity target. The short-term target for 2030 is 450 gigawatt renewable energy capacity, of which 300 gigawatts would be the solar, which forms the largest chunk of renewable capacity. Along with solar, we also have wind, which is the second largest, and other smaller capacities of bio and hydro as well. So it's interesting to note that I'll come to this in more depth, but I'll just give some examples at the moment. For wind turbines, for example, some of the minerals that are needed include chromium, manganese, molybdenum, nickel, and rare earths. And we actually already do have some mining of chromium and manganese. However, we don't currently produce molybdenum, nickel, and rare earths, despite having some potential to do so. Moving on, we have the electric vehicle targets, which is another big component of India's climate change mitigation efforts. To start with, we have the FAME, the faster adoption of manufacturing of electric vehicles, and the national mission on transformative mobility and battery storage, both of which aims to increase, or both of which will be helping increase India's share of sales of EVs by 2030. There's a 30% at 2030 target, where 30% of all sales of electric vehicles in 2030 shall be, 30% of all vehicle sales will be electric by 2030. And some of the critical minerals needed for this include lithium, cobalt, and rare earths. Interestingly, none of these are produced in India at the moment. And despite having some resources of cobalt and rare earths, we don't have any production. And for now, we would either have to rely on the import of the minerals to then later produce the end technologies, or we would have to rely on importing the final products. So based on these various scenarios, I want to look at some of the select mineral requirements we have for clean energy as well as electric vehicles. We've used a couple of sources here for both. For the clean energy targets, we've used the International Energy Agency's STEPS projections, which looks at the stated policy scenarios for India and gives estimates on what will the levels of renewable energy capacity be, as well as provides some indicative material intensities for each. That is the kilograms of each mineral that is needed for each end-use technology. And as is evident from 19 to 25, the cumulative need is fairly low to start with. But by 2035 to 2040, the need will escalate dramatically, especially for minerals that are used for solar, such as indium and silver. Likewise, for electric vehicles, we have quite a large requirement over the next 10 years. CEW has made some projections, including 102 million new electric vehicles to be sold in India over the next 10 years. Primarily, it will be two-wheelers, I think just over 90 million, and a few million cars as well, along with another few million three-wheeler vehicles. So for these, we would need a large increase in the demand for graphite, lithium, and cobalt, as well as some nickel and rare earths. Just to note that this is all work in progress, and we should be improving our own projections and for the final working paper, which is due in the next few weeks. I think one thing we wanted to check immediately was looking at India's geological potential and comparing the Indian National Mineral Inventory to some of the numbers that we have estimated for mineral needs. So interestingly, for copper, despite having a huge potential and resources of over 12,000 kilotons, we only have currently reserves, which is the economically mineable portion of about 2.7 billion tons. Whereas over the next 20 years or so, we'll need closer to 5 million tons. So clearly, there's a bit of a lacuna in exploration efforts where some of these general deposits or resources can be further explored in order to extract for these mineral needs, and not at all mentioning the other mineral needs barring clean energy technologies. Similarly, for cobalt, we have currently no reserves, but the Indian Bureau of Mines has estimated quite a substantial resources in India. I think the same goes for both graphite and chromium. Chromium is on the more positive end. We do have quite a bit of chromium, so that would be a mineral that we would be able to export. So finally, I'd like to just go through some of the policy implications of the work we have done, starting with the need for enhanced exploration efforts, as well as more production of these minerals. This is the key deficit that we have right now, where exploration is not yet happening for these deep-seated minerals to the level it should be, especially considering India's immense geological potential, which is sometimes compared to the geology of Australia, which produces many of the critical minerals that we need. Another aspect of this includes the allocation process. CSEP has also done some work on the allocation of non-fuel minerals, including the auctions. And one thing we've noted in our earlier work is that a different process is needed for deep-seated minerals. One where we can bring in the very specialized skill needed for the extraction and exploration of these deep-seated minerals. Next, moving on to supply chains, it's very important that we start developing a good supply chains and trade agreements, especially with these critical mineral producing countries. There are plenty in Australia, China, South America. And at the moment, we have some engagements through KADL, which is Khanij Videsh India Limited, a government sector organization, which is made up of MECL, NALCO, and HCL. Their goal is to have government-to-government engagements to acquire assets in foreign countries. But there is still potential for further even B2B, if not G2B engagements as well, where we can secure assets in South America, the ABC triangle, especially for lithium. And finally, on recycling, many of the minerals that we have looked at have very low recycling rates, much lower than what it is in other countries as well. So one way to reduce the supply risk is to be able to recycle the minerals, especially when some of the older green technologies start to be decommissioned. We can pull out the permanent magnets from wind turbines or reuse some of the battery components and vehicles and help reduce the supply risk of having to import these minerals in the future. So thank you very much, Professor Chadha, for the time to present this work. I'd also like to thank the team at CSEP and Divya, who's joined us as an intern, for her assistance.
Thanks, Ganesh, for the presentation. And as he said, and I mentioned in the beginning, that this is just the glimpse of the work that we are doing and is yet to be put in its final form, which would take us another couple of weeks. But I thought that this webinar would give us some guidance, and with 3 experts with us, I think we would hear a lot, and so that while we are finalizing the work, we incorporate the important suggestions that we get from the experts and maybe from those who are participating and attending. With this, I think I'll move to our distinguished panelists, and I would like to invite Shri R.K. Sinha, former Controller General, Indian Bureau of Mines, to speak first. He superannuated as the Controller General of Indian Bureau of Mines. He is a graduate from IIT ISM Dhanbad, a very senior serving person with the government. He was instrumental in drafting the national mineral policies of 2008 and 2019 and implementing the mining surveillance system, MSS, to curb illegal mining. He has traveled abroad with Indian delegations to various countries, including Australia. Honorable High Court of Rajasthan appointed Shri Sinha as the chairman of the expert committee in mining related matters. So it is our privilege to have you with us, Shri Sinha, and may I request you to be guiding us on the following. That is what probably Ganesh has discussed in his presentation and we are looking at. The perspective from the government policy point of view on exploration and mining. Is there a slack? Can we do something? Can there be better policies for critical minerals and in fact all minerals? particularly of energy and battery critical minerals? And how can Kabil get stronger, accountable, and responsive to the emerging needs for these minerals? For those who have not got Kabil, it is the Khanij Videsh India Limited, a combination of three public sector organizations which are looking into how to ensure the mineral security of critical minerals. I think I hand it over to Shri Sinha, and over to you for 12 minutes now.
And thank you, Professor Chadda, for introducing me. Good afternoon, everyone. Mr. Vikram Mehta, Chairman, Mr. Rakesh Mohan, my fellow panelists, Mr. Ranjan Mathai and Mr. Mohan Elisetti, and members from the CSEP. At the outset, I would like to thank CSEP for inviting me as one of the panelists on this important topic. As we know that besides 4 failed minerals, India produces as much as 90 odd non-fuel minerals. This non-fuel mineral is likely to play a pivotal role in transition from conventional to clean technology for, for a climate mitigation measures. So with this view, as well as to accelerate the production, exploration of non-fuel minerals, National Mineral Policy 2019 was drafted and it was put on the public domain. It was accepted by the Government of India. This National Mineral Policy 2019 also highlights how the exploration has to be accelerated besides accelerating the production. This you might be aware that the requirement of mineral for clean technology is much more than the conventional technology, as one has rightly pointed out that the requirement for electric vehicle, the requirement of non-fuel mineral is 6 times than that of the conventional. Similar in the power sector, the requirement goes to 9 times. Even the policy recognizes the importance of production of pure metal so that it can be utilized for production of photovoltaic cells, then battery storage. So for that, it has been stated that research and development will be carried out to find out what are the gaps, what are the critical minerals which we do not possess. In view of, because we do not have some of the minerals, or our geological environment has not been able to explore to that extent. So we are dependent on the import of some critical minerals. In that case, the policy states that mineral security or acquisition of mineral assets abroad has to be done through government or private participation. For that, institutional framework has to be chalked out. In this connection, only Kabil, that is a joint venture of NALCO, National Aluminium Company Limited, Hindustan Copper Limited, and MECL Mineral Exploration Corporation Limited, was formed in the year 2019 itself. But you might be aware that Hindustan Copper Limited is on the list of disinvestment process, and the financial health of MECL is not up to the mark. So Kabil has not been able to make much of headway in acquisition of mineral asset abroad as of now, as per my opinion. So then comes, what about the exploration within the country? India obvious geological potential area, that is where there is a likelihood of occurrence of various mineral, is around 0.57 million square kilometer, which constitutes about 17% of the total land mass. So ex, in order to expedite the exploration, government has taken certain incentives, certain measures have been taken by the government, because this 0.7 million square kilometer is not a static figure, because it will definitely expand as and when we take up more of reconnaissance work. And you might be aware that the government has embarked upon national aerogeophysical mapping of about 8 lakh line kilometer, which is likely to add some more potential area for investigation. So out of this obvious geological potential area, only 10% of the area has so far been explored in detail. So whatever the resource and reserves that is being quoted by the Indian Bureau of Mines, that is based on the exploration, so far exploration done, and a vast chunk of the area remains unexplored. In order to expedite the exploration, the government formed National Mineral Exploration Trust with the amendment of Mines and Mineral Development and Regulation Act 2015. The act was, the trust was mandated to support or to fund the exploration activities. And so far, most of the government companies like CMPDI for the coal, MECL, GSI, and state undertakings have been provided fund from the from the inmate, and it is funded through 2% levy on the royalty. So roughly 600 crore rupee accrued to this fund on an annual basis. If we analyze the entire work done by inmate National Mineral Exploration Trust, you will see that major chunk of the expenditure was done on generating geoscientific survey data. That's almost 40% of the money has been spent on generating the geoscientific data. Then 24% of the amount has been spent on exploration of bulk minerals that we call iron, limestone, manganese, chromite, etc. And 24% again on the coal. So only 10% mineral has gone for deep-seated mineral, where we are really lacking. Our resource base is very poor. And it has already been recognized in the National Mineral Policy 2019 that exploration has to be expedited for such minerals where our reserve and resource base is poor. Then there are certain minerals which we are totally dependent on the import. As just a presentation of it about the cobalt and some resource assessment made by the Indian Bureau of Mines. Here I would like to say that there is a nickeliferous limonite occurring in Sukinda Valley in Odisha that contains nickel to a greater extent, and with the association of nickel, cobalt is found. So this resource is estimated on that basis. But till date, we have not been able to break through the technology for commercial exploitation of extraction of nickel from the nickeliferous limonite found in Sukinda Valley. So that's again a big challenge for us. Then similarly in the RE field, that rare earth elements, that In India, mostly it's found along the placer deposits in the southern coast in the state of Kerala, Andhra Pradesh, to some extent in Karnataka. And this only in Indian Rare Earth Limited, they are extracting rare earth elements from monazite, which is the main source for the thorium. But this even IRL is not able to extract the metal. They are only RE oxides, either it is oxide or chloride. Even they are not able to extract because again commercial viability is one of the issue. And so far as mineral allocation is concerned, now the policy envisages transparent allocation of mineral resources through auction. Now, auction is the only mode by which mineral assets are allocated to different places. There is no different method for allocation of deep-seated mineral or surface minerals. Only the level of exploration varies. In case of surface mineral, the level of exploration is required to be carried out up to G2 level, what we call as per the UNFC standard. And now with the amendment of MMDR Act into 2021, even this restriction in respect of some minerals like iron ore, limestone and bauxite has been done away with. Even in an area put up to G3 level of exploration, that we call it preliminary exploration, that can be put up for auction. And previously, only government agencies like Geological Survey of India, Mineral Exploration Corporation, Directorate of Mines and Geology of various states or various state undertakings were entitled to carry out exploration without having any license, exploration license, under Section 4 of MMDR Act. But with the amendment of Act in the year 2021, when the central government can notify some private agencies who are basically accredited from the QCI, NABET and organization, so that we want to have more and more exploration agencies. But here what we are lacking is that we are not able to develop the ecosystem for junior miner, which has been a long-standing demand to explore the country in depth. Because I think Mr. Mohan Sethi will agree, in Australia, Canada, we have a lot of junior miners who specializes in carrying out the exploration. They find out the deposit, they scale up the deposit to a development stage, and they hand it over to the miners who will take it to, and they move on. So their specialization in exploration. But with the recent amendment in MMDR and an order, sorry, passed by the central government on 12th August 21, which says that these private exploration agencies can take up exploration in the area after getting a written consent from the state government or from the central government or from the existing prospecting licensee or mining agencies. So even they will work just like an exploration contractor. They do not, this act doesn't confer a title, right of title to this exploration contractor. However, they will be reimburse the expenditure carried out on the exploration. So it has to be seen whether the this junior miners would come over here to work as a contractor or not. Because when we adopted open sky policy in the year 2015 and NERP, that is non-exclusive reconnaissance permit, was introduced, for 5 years nobody came to take the non-exclusive reconnaissance permit, and it miserably failed. So in this 2021, this provision, that is a reconnaissance per grant of reconnaissance permit, has been dispensed with, and now we have only two types of licenses. One is the composite license, which is also known as prospecting cum mining lease, and other is a mining lease. So the system is getting simplified, but yet it has to see the hectic exploration activities by the private companies, because we need investment in the exploration sector as well as we need new technology, because we have to go to much deeper depth to explore basically the deep-seated minerals, critical minerals, or even RE. As on date, whenever the exploration is carried out in coal belt or even in a this bauxite plateau zone, everywhere it has been mandated to have the sample analyzed for the occurrence of rare earth element. But we have not been able to find any workable deposit of rare earth element in this in online day, where only in the offshore zone we are getting something. So this exploration is one of the major stumbling block to unlock the mineral potentiality of our country. And I think with this new legislation, even a junior miner can come and bid for a composite license, which can be offered even at the level of the reconnaissance G4 level, because recently you might have seen that 100 G4 blocks were handed over to the state government by the Honorable Minister of Mines, central government, so that it can be put on blocks and put on the auction, and junior miners can come and bid for the same. But there is no methodology for allocating the mineral assets on nomination basis. So it has to be seen whether the junior miners will come and bid for this auction or not. Then another point which I would like to make.
Sinha, if you can sum up now.
Yeah, just 1 minute. So far as some of the minerals like iron, limestone, we do have sufficient reserve to meet the demand in the foreseeable future, because our iron ore resource is about 26 million ton and we are producing around 200 million ton. Similarly, in limestone also we have significant reserves. So I think we have to look for some of the critical minerals at this moment, how we can find out. So thank you, Professor Chadha, for giving us more time. Thank you. Over to you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Chadha.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sinha. It was a detailed description of what exactly the policies that we have to look at, and what needs to be done, at least is quite clear from the detailed comments that you have given. Thank you very much for that, and thanks for joining. I think we'll move now to Shri Ranjan Mathai, former Foreign Secretary and Advisor Vedanta. Thank you very much, Mr. Mathai, for making time to join us. Mr. Mathai, Ranjan Mathai is a former Foreign Secretary of the Government of India. After completing his post-graduation in political studies from the University of Pune, he joined Indian Foreign Service and served in several key roles in the Ministry of External Affairs, including postings to the Indian embassies in Austria, Sri Lanka, US, Iran, and Belgium. He served as Indian ambassador to Israel, Qatar before taking over as the Deputy High Commissioner to UK, and in 2013, he took over as the Indian High Commissioner to the United Kingdom. He is been an advisor to us in this study. He is in the advisory board of our study. So we are very fortunate to have him agree on speaking today. And if I can request you, Shri Mathai, to give us an overview of the role of critical minerals in green technologies, that is the topic of the day, the geopolitical dimensions, and some suggestions for India's mineral resource security in this scenario. Over to you, Shri Mathai.
Thank you, Dr. Chadda, and thank you to all the other panelists. I began by saying that I'm the only generalist here, being neither a geologist nor an economist nor a specialist in this field. In my long years in government, 41 years, I often thought of myself as a voice in the wilderness, both on energy and on minerals. And therefore, my focus has been later to be something of a popularizer of some of these requirements for economic life. In the title, we've been told it's about green technology, but the story so far has been almost entirely focused on energy and the role of critical minerals. And that's a good focus because in general, people outside the world of research, they think of the sun and the wind as producing energy, which they do. But human beings indeed need electricity and fuel. They don't need energy per se in the abstract. And they also need feedstocks. I'll come to that at the end. And therefore, they need converters, catalysts, chemicals. And at the heart of all these three is critical minerals. I personally believe the switch over to green technologies is going to be far more difficult in terms of lifestyles and in terms of new technologies than has so far been conceived and believed. And therefore, it's important that we do get a grip on critical minerals. While there has been, as you mentioned, discussions and studies since 1987, even earlier, but I think the Paris Accords of 2015-16 really gave a global focus and an intense focus on the role of critical minerals. And one of the first major studies was that of the World Bank in 2017, called Minerals and Metals for a Low Carbon Future. They updated that in 2020, but one general conclusion they arrived at is that in many critical minerals like graphite, lithium, cobalt, we know the list, the overall production over the next 3 decades has to increase by something like 500%. And they talked in terms of 3 billion tons of this metal flowing out. The World Bank boldly says that all this production will still have only 6% of the carbon footprint of the fossil fuels in greenhouse gas emissions which are being produced. I think this is a very bold statement. I'm not so sure. If one looks at even normal studies on the internal combustion engine versus the electric vehicle, I believe the electric vehicle actually starts with a disadvantage, and it is only through the tailpipe emissions that the benefits begin to flow in. However, let us avoid any kind of dissension or controversy. The consensus today is that we have to move away from fossil fuels. So, a vast range of minerals is going to be required for mining, processing, refining, and recycling. All will have to be ramped up. All are energy intensive and highly polluting. So I think at the first level, industry must prepare for what the OECD calls climate smart mining. And once the OECD comes out with a prescription, be assured that it will become a global guideline. And so mineral industries, countries, regulators will have to adapt to this, or investors will find it very difficult to invest. The second big conclusion arising out of this is that supply chains, security, and costs will become critical to every economy in the world. The concentration of critical minerals in key geographies, or rather key geologies, will generate a new geoeconomics, which will inevitably lead to new geopolitical combinations and concerns. The intensive research, the third conclusion, there will be an intensive research and development of alternatives and substitutes. And therefore, in the world we are developing with fast growth in mining, development of critical minerals, you will come up with new issues of sustainability, as well as the old phenomenon of boom and bust cycles. One mineral which is in very high demand for a decade suddenly ceases to be so, and this will lead to very severe problems in the global economy. Therefore, rationality would suggest that cooperation between consumers and producers at a geopolitical level is the need of the hour. But history suggests that this is highly unlikely and that more competition, if anything, is most likely. The range of minerals required, Ganesh has given us a very excellent introduction, and other speakers are more qualified. Let's just say that in every technology, whether it's batteries, solar PV, wind, etc., all are going to require critical minerals. I did not see any reference to hydrogen. I think it's important, considering how much talk there is today about blue, green, gray hydrogen, that just how much you're going to depend on palladium, platinum, iridium in the electrolyzers. And cobalt phosphate is now being talked of as a cheaper alternative. But it is important to remember this. I also think there's a need to keep in mind not just the minerals you mentioned, but the so-called minor minerals and metals, which play a vital role in thin film PVs and so on, most of which are byproducts of other minerals, which is to say that if you don't have zinc, you may not get cadmium, but without cadmium, you can't go ahead. Similarly, tellurium and copper. So how do you manage these combinations in the future as we go along? Remember, all of these are highly capital intensive, energy intensive, and potentially toxic. So there's going to be a very need for a very major focus on management of these industries. There's now talk of perovskites as the way of the future. So there will be increasingly minerals and metals we have never heard of, which are going to become important in our lives. The general point is that new critical minerals could emerge. Some will cease to be critical over time, but on the whole, the reliance on minerals is going to increase. I personally think the move away from the Paris Accords to what is called the net zero emissions, with the pressure being mounted on all countries around the world to commit to a date for net zero emissions, is going to dramatically increase the pressure on the mineral industries. The implications are economic. Take one simple figure: coal production valued at $400 billion a few years ago. They say by 2040 it will be down to 2050, sorry. Whereas the transition minerals will be up from $50 billion worth of production today to something around just under 300. So they are going to see a big shift in the economic value of different products and different countries. The geopolitical concentration, I'm glad you dealt with this subject. It is generally a point to note that it is even greater in lithium, cobalt, rare earths, even greater than the concentration of oil and gas within the OPEC. And RE, as you said, rare earths, it's the processed RE which is even more concentrated in China than elsewhere. So I think even with recycling and composites coming in, there will be new dependencies and a new era of geopolitics, not only in physical supply, but in access to technology and the likely emergence of new coalitions. it was rightly mentioned that when China cut off Japan, there was a major problem in Japan. I happened to be in Delhi at the year after, when the Japanese turned to us for collaboration on rare earths, which Dr. Sinha gave us a hint. One reason, because of our regulatory system, we weren't able to do it. So they turned to Australia. And jointly, Australia and Japan turned to Malaysia. So there's a coalition there, Mount Lenas, producing the rare earths, which is used very heavily both by Japan and Australia. Similarly, Australia and the United States have already announced a strategic partnership on critical minerals. This is likely to be a feature as we go along. So what is to be done for a country like us? One, we must have a very clearly enunciated strategy for critical minerals. We have been told that we are on the way there, and we have probably got some documents already out. The United States has had this for a very long time. China did it in 2003, Japan the same year. The EU has refined its critical mineral strategy in 2018. I would like to pick up on the US example and build on this. Since the Cold War, the United States has had strategic mineral stockpiles similar to its strategic petroleum reserve. And when the Cold War ended and it looked like trading relationships would take care of mineral requirements, there was a downplaying of the requirements for this stockpile, and it had dwindled substantially. By an executive order in December 2017, President Trump revived this and gave far greater emphasis to critical mineral stockpiling and mining and research in alternatives. And the definition of critical minerals was one whose absence would cause serious damage to the economy or endanger national security or actually be a supply chain risk. So the strategic stockpiles are being built, new technologies to reduce the use of critical minerals are being encouraged, and new diplomatic strategies towards key producers or, and this is very important, potential producers, people whose geology the agencies in the advanced countries know more about than the countries themselves. So this is going to be a new era where trading in this kind of knowledge is going to become very vital. Trading, I mean, not in a physical sense, but the geopolitical management of such knowledge. Kabil, we have been told, I think it is now time to intensify its engagements. And I would strongly recommend that we work much more closely with the Ministry of External Affairs and with the National Security Council than it has so far. We do know that on certain minerals, including the rare earths, there has been this coordination, but that's largely because rare earths are controlled by the Department of Atomic Energy. In terms of geology, we know we share geology both with Australia and Africa. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done. We have a fairly good technological base. In fact, the IIT Delhi was one of those which came out with the redox battery for using vanadium as an alternative to lithium. But between the research and development and the production phase, there is what is traditionally known as the valley of death in all production management. And this is something which we still have not been able to overcome. On mining, I'm glad Dr. Sinha told us about the exploration incentives, but as long as an explorer does not get an automatic right to cash in on the success of his exploration, which is the norm in most serious mining geologies around the world, I think we will still be lagging behind in getting international investments. The deep underground, yes, we need not only new approach to deep underground mining, we need a whole new regulatory regime. Most of our regimes are built on assumptions of surfacial mining. And technologies, the investments required are of such a scale that unless the regulations change, it will be uneconomic to go in for much deep underground mining. And finally, I think we'll have to look very seriously at social license. Everything to do with mining in India is controversial. It's either trampling on somebody's rights or destroying somebody's forests. So to balance the global requirement of moving away from the dangers of climate change to a more sustainable future is one you have to marry with the requirements of that sustainable future. I'd like to make one final point before I finish, and that is when we talk of green technology, we must remember that when the energy base of the world shifts away from fossil fuels, and here I'm going to pick up on oil and gas, and if the production of these items falls dramatically, it is not only energy that's going to be hit. The entire world of chemicals, feedstocks for plastics, pharmaceuticals, fertilizers, most of the products which make life possible on Earth is going to have to be reworked. Where are we going to do this? We must start now and work together. Thank you.
I'm on mute. Thank you very much, Srimadhai. It was a very detailed set of comments on what is important in the wake of the new energy and green technologies, as well as you are pointing out to the hydrogen energy that is. So we have not talked about that. We should surely include that aspect. And in the case of your observation on zinc and others, so what we are doing is we are considering many more minerals, and that zinc and other minerals would also be. But I think the most important point that I get from you is the difference between the concentrated minerals versus cross-cutting minerals. Minerals which are used in many technologies, as Ganesh had pointed out, versus mineral used in one or two technologies which might get obsolete. And as you said, in 10 years' time, the people who have invested and industries might, it will all be waste. So we have carefully noted all the points that you have mentioned, and we definitely take it forward from here. Thank you very much. And I think we can have some discussion towards the end, but moving now to Professor Mohan Yeli Shetty, who is an associate professor, resources engineering, Monash University. So I got in touch with him while we are doing this kind of research because he's done a lot of work on critical minerals. He's an associate professor at and is an Australian Endeavour Fellow and Chartered Mining Engineer who has been extensively involved in teaching and research in mining and environmental engineering. He has been recognized as one of the leading experts in sustainable mineral resources and life cycle assessment. Professor Yeli Shetty obtained his Master of Technology from IIT Bombay, and his PhD in Environment Engineering is from Monash University, and his postdoctoral research at Yale University. So a very warm welcome and thanks once again for making time and joining us. And I'll specifically request you for what we have been discussing, the role and importance of academia and maybe research and research think tanks to build a community of practice, provide studies to advise the government and stakeholders. That is what the discussion is today about, and how to minimize the environmental externalities of mining and processing critical minerals, because this is an important question that some of the critical minerals mining as well as processing might have more externalities, environmental externalities than other minerals. So over to you, Professor Yeli Shetty. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Professor Chadda. Am I audible now? Can you hear?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, at the outset, my sincere thanks goes to you and Ganesh for getting me involved in this very remarkable first, number of steps that you've been taking, but in terms of critical minerals. Thank you so much for that. And I'm really honored and privileged, as I expressed at the beginning of this meeting. I'm sharing the dais with some of the very highly distinguished people, for example, Mr. Mathai and so on. So if you allow me, I would like to show a couple of slides so that will make the presentation a little bit more impactful from my point of view, because I'm not as eloquent speaker as others, so I would rather use some of these slides. Oh, sorry, there are 4 screens. So can you see my screen? Is that okay? Yep, good. So yeah, my name is Mohan Yalishetty. I'm also a co-founder of Critical Minerals Consortium at Monash University. So I'll talk to some of these Critical Minerals Consortium and the kind of work that we have been engaged. And Professor Chadda asked me to especially focus on the academia and research, the role of that, and which in fact has been identified at a number of forums. As I go through, I'll sort of allude to some of the important aspects of that. So again, just to put things into perspective, Ganesh touched upon it, Mr. Sinha touched upon it, and also Mr. Mathai. So critical minerals, first of all, they become critical because they are not mined for themselves. They form part of the major metals. So for example, I call the inner circle here, this is a metal wheel that we are familiar with. And the inner circle is I would call them as my generation of metals. That means when I was at a mining school, perhaps, these were the main metals that we were mining for. But most of the metals that we are talking of today, whether it is platinum group of metals or rare earths or lithium, cobalt, and so on and so forth. So they are companions. That means they are not mined for themselves. That's also one of the important reasons why they become critical, because Mr. Mathai was talking about zinc, for example. So when there's not enough demand for zinc, that means zinc won't be mined. That means the metals that are going to be accompanied with the extraction of zinc will be at stake. So that's a issue there when we talk about critical minerals. And also what we need to understand when it comes to the minerals potential of India and the real assessment of minerals potential of India, especially around critical minerals, we often neglect the real potential that is in the form of the tailings that are present. For example, we have been mining Kolar gold fields. If you go to, we have been undertaking mining of gold for over a century. And there are a lot of huge piles of tailings. And in the past, I've been to a number of field visits as part of my consulting role. Even Hatti gold mines, for example, they've got huge pile of these tailings. Now, I used to work, before I migrated to Australia, I used to work in Goa. Goa used to be very pristine and beautiful landscape with the lush green ecotourism and all of that. And there used to be always conflicting issues. Mr. Mathai touched upon again, the social license to operate. So no one wants the mining, but everyone wants all the derivatives of mining, so to say, that we need metals, we need electricity, we need all of that, but no one would like to have the mining first. And especially when you talk of most of the critical minerals, they have got very specific characteristics such as catalytic, metallurgical, electrical, and magnetic. So that's why their role is becoming tremendously important as we go. And again, I don't want to spend too much time. This is very much part of the International Energy Agency's report. So most of the metals are highly concentrated in supply, either production or in the processing. As you can see on the right-hand side, top right-hand side, the processing of many of them is concentrated in one country. In certain cases, it could be up to 70 to 80%, for example, in rare earths. Or China. Again, there's no issue in that, but when the controls become too geopolitically motivated, that's when we had seen the consequences of it. Either you pay a very high premium, or their supply becomes too constrained for that matter. And here is an excellent example of how a criticality, for example, Australia produces nearly world's 50% of lithium as spodumene, for example. Much of that happens from Western Australia. But the criticality does not come from the mining per se, but it is more in the refining and electrochemical production and cell manufacturing. So that's where we need to be understanding the entire criticality dynamics, so to say. And so then we sort of we this is where I am coming from an academic point of view and the research point of view. So there are many of those intricately related aspects that are sort of interlinked in the critical minerals and their supply chains story, for example. So that's where there is a need for a collaborative consortia to work together. And in fact, it is with this intention at Monash University, we established a critical minerals consortium, knowing that, okay, not every single discipline of expertise is available within one university or one research organization. So we have put together a consortium that brings about several universities and research organizations together, which encompass, for example, you require geochemical knowledge base and geology knowledge base and public policy, like Mr. Mathai touched upon again. And we also need to have extensive knowledge about the extractive metallurgy. For example, I was talking about tailings, the slags, and fly ash, for example. Now, how do we extract these without impacting, again, in a very more sustainable and eco-friendly manner, so that we leave minimum ecological footprint in the way that we extract? Even companies are now thinking that solvent extraction, for example, when you talk of metal extraction from minerals, so you only get 2 to 5 grams of gold in a ton of dirt that you essentially pick up. And when you concentrate it and when you finally get, so you leave a lot of unwanted material in the form of tailings and also in the form of waste rock, which themselves will have a tremendous impact on the surrounding environment in the form of releasing leachates into the groundwater systems. And also, if you go to Goa, some parts of Goa, you see all of that pristine beauty is covered with all these red heaps of wastes that are sort of stockpiled for longer periods of time, which could have a lot of environmental consequences. So we also need to know what kind of, I think from the presentation Ganesh was making, I could see that, we need to model what kind of demand scenarios that we could potentially have and where this material has to come and what kind of collaborations that countries need to forge with countries that are able to supply, and both in terms of expertise and also kind of materials. And on the other side, we also touched upon the substitutions and alternatives. So we need to also look into some of those aspects as we, so not every time the substitution can work, but again, you are comparing them in terms of the performance versus that kind of cost benefit what you call the trade-offs that we need to sort of have. So from that point of view, we need a whole host of various expertise of people together to be able to unpack the number of mysteries that surround this very important area. So then coming to the program, the Geoscience Australia's ambitious program, which is mainly focused around exploring for the future. So what they are trying to do is they are trying to map the entire continent and try not only of the potential deposits, but also of the deposits that have been left. For example, the untapped resources from the tailings and slags and the ash dams, so to say, because they also got tremendous potential. Because back my generation, we never were bothered about these metals, so we never tried to even have an estimate, forget about extraction. So it is important that we first of all we assess our own potential in the form of understanding what true value that these slags and tailings that are sitting around the country have real benefit to offer, so to say. And then this is an ambitious program which Geoscience Australia is spearheading. So this is one important thing that a country like India could easily emulate. And there is already some kind of agreement between the Geological Survey of India and Geoscience Australia, where they could leverage some of the excellent expertise available in the Australian geosciences. And there's another important dimension to this. This is also multilateral. So this is another recent development that happened, a cooperation between 3 countries like Australia, Canada, and the United States, wherein they are working together to support critical minerals discovery and knowledge sharing, and also the database generation and so on and so forth. So there are some best examples like these which could be sort of looked into. And so here is another important dimensions, again, from academic and research point of view. So back in April, the trade ministers of 3 different three countries, Australia, India, and Japan, met. And one of the important thing they also sort of highlighted is the collaboration between academia and research in making sure that we have a resilient supply chain systems. So with that, I just come to the last couple of things. So I did touch upon this. So we established the Critical Minerals Consortium, which is a consortium of universities and research organizations. And I'm one of the co-founders, along with Dr. David Whittle and Associate Professor Gavin Mudd. And we also have got 2 brilliant special advisors, Mr. Stephen McIntosh, who was formerly with Rio Tinto as group executive in a kind of similar to chief technology officer, and Professor Robin Batterham, who are sort of helping us in number of different ways to sort of forge collaborations and so on and so forth. So we did contribute to this very important piece of research, which was commissioned by Geoscience Australia, which is Critical Minerals in Australia, a review of opportunities and research needs. So that unpacked what are those important areas that we need to further research, which includes mapping of all the tailings and the various other prospects which potentially could contain critical minerals. Besides that, we also pioneered the critical minerals dynamic criticality method for the first time, which is agent-based, which sort of takes into account a number of those aspects of criticality. And we have presented to a joint parliamentary committee and then a white paper, which sort of uncovered a number of facts about what there are certain things which are critical to Australia. Also, for example, we identified potash being one of those elements which is very critical to a country like Australia, which has got a huge agriculture sector. So that's something that we are spearheading. And another important when it comes to Indo-Australia, so this is a consortium that we sort of put together, which again brings that academia and research collaboration in a cross-country context with a variety of different areas of people involved in this. So we are calling this as a Resources Trinity Consortium between Australia and India, which has about 11 IITs and 2 NITs plus 2 research universities as part of this. And we would like to grow this further for the benefit of both the countries in terms of assisting the governments and the policy making bodies and so on. So I think that's where I'm going to stop. I hope I touched upon the various important aspects of what I was asked to sort of look at, and then I'm open to any questions. Thank you so much, and over to you, Professor Chadha.
Thank you so much, Dr. Eli Shetty. I think it was a very detailed overview of what are the issues that are important for the critical minerals and how can academia and research both benefit from understanding these better and contribute to the growth and development of the country as such, but I think more importantly, even the affected communities in those regions. Goa, you gave as an example, which is quite very much in discussion. So I think with this, we complete one cycle of very special comments from our expert panelists. And if I may, because we have not got many questions in the Q&A, if I can see, but I think one of the participants a good friend, Mr. Scott Davenport, is attending the webinar. He is the Executive Director and Chief Economist, NSW Trade and Investment in Sydney. He had sent a question separately on to me as well as to the for being discussed, where the question is that the desire to increase the extraction of India's critical minerals raises a number of very important public policy issues that the research may be able to pursue if critical minerals extraction is both economically and environmentally sustainable. So, and I think we also have that in mind, that how environmentally sustainable the critical mineral mining would be, whether to do it in India or get the imports done. We are looking into various aspects. But one of my questions to the panelists, maybe queries to the panelists, is that is there an alternative to the current process, which all of you have in a way said that, you know, if somebody explores and does not get the right after 200 failed explorations, he or she succeeds in one, and he or she does not get the right to mine. So are there any alternatives that one can think, particularly for critical and deep-seated minerals? And this is in a way probably a couple of minutes, maybe three minutes to each of the panelists. And going first to Mr. Sinha, please.
Okay, Professor Chadha, just I would like to say that the success ratio in mineral discovery is varies from 1 in 500 to 1 in 1000. So the ratio is such a skew that no junior miners will come unless and until he gets the right. So the present dispensation provides that they can come for bidding, because in composite license they can bid for the composite license, they get the rights, but only they have to participate in the bidding. That is the only a key point which they have to overcome. So besides other, the present policy doesn't provide for a allocation of area on nomination basis. Then one or 2 points, if the time permits, I can just substantiate, or I can substantiate afterwards, Professor Chadha.
Maybe a couple of minutes more, because we have 7 minutes left.
One is just like as said by Mr. Eli Sethi about the quotas. In India also, we are totally importing quotas, and we don't have any commercially viable deposit at this moment, though there is in Rajasthan. So this needs to be touched. The fertilizer, this is part of the fertilizer mineral, because it becomes critical from supply chain point of view. And so far as Mr. Ranjan Mathai has said about the concerns of the local population, just I would like to bring before him that now District Mineral Foundation has been established in almost 633 districts, and about 10% of the royalty or 30% of the royalty, depending on the mode of allocation, goes towards this fund to take care of the local population and to address the concerns of the local population. And this fund is so far working nicely, and a lot of projects have been completed for the benefit of the local people. And doom and gloom, boom and doom minerals. The classic example, I can say, it is a mica. Once upon a time, mica was on the top, and now with the advent of synthetic mica doesn't figure anywhere. So today, what is a critical may not become critical tomorrow. That we have to keep in mind.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Sinha. And I think we have also done some work on DMF and how they are spending, which will soon be published. So we'll share the copy with you. Over to you, Shri Mathai, for comments on, you know, what we have been discussing even in our advisory councils, that what are the alternatives, you know, because even if it is a composite license, it is given only on select areas. I cannot go and choose an area of my choice and say that I would like to explore. To you, Mathai sir?
Well, in the field of oil and gas, we have moved to what is called open acreage. That is, somebody can put in a bid. Of course, there's still a long regulatory process. But I think on this, we should, I think, hear from Dr. Mohan Yelishetty. What is the best practices in countries like Australia, Canada? Of course, I understand that they're not as heavily populated. The issues regarding mining rights are not as critical there. But surely somebody who invests in geology and then decides to make a bid for a certain area of land gets the right to develop the mineral if it is located. Whereas in my understanding, even our composite license gives the explorer an advantage in the final bid of getting the mining license and not an automatic one, but I could be wrong. I look forward to hearing. On District Mineral Fund, yes, I know. My own impression based on some of your studies is that it has certainly been a great success in collecting money, but it has been less so in actually spending money for the purposes for which it was intended. But that's a work in progress, and I'm sure it is improving. But Dr. Mohan Yelishetty, please tell us how this works in Australia or Canada or other serious mining jurisdictions.
Yep. Thanks. I think that's a very important, very interesting question. I'm not an expert in the government policy side, but what I can tell us is the way that we collaborated with Geoscience Australia. For example, we partnered with Geoscience Australia. In fact, one of my colleagues, Dr. Stuart Walsh, who is a senior lecturer in our resources engineering program. So he led that that research, and I was co-investigator in that particular research. So what we produced for Geoscience Australia is a geospatial tool that would be used as a we call it as a blue cap model, and that's hosted on Geoscience Australia's website. For example, if you are an explorer, or if you got some interest in a particular metal of interest, what you would do is you would get onto this particular website, and then you make all those adjustments, because it would have a number of those you can make number of those assumptions and then come up with a prospective area, and that is your pre-scoping level kind of study, where you would demarcate, okay, if I want to extract tin in some part of Australia, so where would I go, whether it would be Western Australia or Queensland, and that kind of macroscopic level kind of demarcation or delineation that would happen. We call it as economic fairways. And a similar approach is being taken similar for hydrogen projects and also for critical minerals mapping. So that is one aspect of the kind of work that we did in collaboration with Geoscience Australia. But also, in fact, I've been trying to convince the government of India, why can't we do a similar project for India, wherein you get this pre-scoping level kind of studies with absolutely no cost, where a prospective exploration company could have a target delineation initially before coming to India, for example. And then coming to the allocations issues are concerned, I think it goes the same way. If you are a explorer, if you have identified a target, then if you have got enough cash, then you would go and start sort of exploitation of that. Otherwise, you will form joint ventures with some of the bigger mining companies and then work in collaboration with them. So that's a kind of mechanism, but I am not very certain as to how, in terms of greater details of how exactly that entire thing works. But in general, from my understanding of the business models, that's a kind of mechanism that's followed in Australia, for example.
Dr. Chadda, can I just come in once again? I
Please.
saw the question you are referring to, and I thought it was very interesting, because while there have been stories in the past of how our mineral resources were in fact um, quote unquote given away or at lower prices than, there was all kinds of allegations. Post the auction regime, I think they have, in fact, I think your study itself shown that the bids are now way beyond the economic value that can be extracted. And why that is so is another set of questions. In general, I think we still have not struck a balance between what is the public right, which is the resources, underground resources of the country, and the economic cost of bringing it into a workable form that contributes to the economy. That balance is one we have still not been able to strike. I think the thing we need to do is to study best practices from around the world, and if necessary, use governmental sources, not private sector sources, set up mechanisms to understand how it works, and always keeping in mind that ours is a far more crowded country with far more people and far more issues relating to every single mining license. But it can be done, and I think the time has come. It has to be done. In oil and gas, we have simply, while our geology is difficult, we have taxed and priced ourselves out of any exploration possibilities. We should not do the same for critical minerals.
Thank you very much.
May I come in?
Please, a minute, please. We've run out, but please, 1 minute.
One thing, because in Australia and Canada, it is a given on FCFS basis, first come, first serve basis. Auction is the only mode which has been adopted in India. And the reason is obvious, because there was a government policy set into after the Supreme Court judgment. So it's a different mode of allocation. But we can definitely say when a presidential reference was made to the Honorable Supreme Court, it was very well said. Auction is not only the move, but transparency has to be ensured. That was. And then I agree with Mr. Mathai that open access policy is being followed in the oil sector, which I think slowly it should be followed in other sector also, so that given a choice. And for that only G4 licenses will be put up, but only problem is they have to come and bid. And in composite license, it is a mandatory, a PL holder has to get the mining license provided he carries out exploration as per this law. So thank you.
Thank you so much. May I request if Mr. Vikram Mehta is around for any comments that he might like to make? Else we would move to. So thank you very much. And Ganesh, any observation, because you started with the presentation, so any observation you would like to make?
Thank you for all the panelists' comments, taking them in for the working paper, and should definitely include them going forward. I think the key points, including on hydrogen, the idea about keeping in mind social licenses, taking inspiration from other countries, international good practices, and working on policy issues domestically as well. We'll take all this into account when further improving our working paper. Thank you.
So once again, thanks very much to the distinguished panelists, to Shri Vikram Mehta for joining and giving the welcome remarks, and to CSEP comms team. Aditi is still there. Thank you, Aditi, and thank you others who have helped organize this event so well. And I think one thing that I just wanted to say towards the end, that these scenarios that we are looking forward to or we are working on are quite at risk themselves, because the pandemic is still there. So how much recovery we would have in the next year would also be an important point to keep in mind. And IEA itself has done about 11 different simulations on how the world is going to emerge. And that is the presentation by Ganesh was on one steps, stated policies. While today's webinar relates to minerals required for clean energy, the CSEP research team has also been working on energy input-output tables. I wanted to mention that towards the end. to understand better the general equilibrium linkages of the power sector, energy sector with other sectors of the economy. So we are also working on the energy input-output tables and would move to Sam. So once again, sincere thanks to Shri Sinha, Shri Mathai, Professor Yeli Shetty, Vikram, and our friends from CSEP who have organized it. And we will make a note out of the discussion points and would share with you. Thank you very much, and we close it here. With sincere thanks to all. Thank you.
Namaskar. Thank you.